Hey guys, welcome back. I am Ashish and today we'll be continuing with module 2, that is administrative thought. A small update, you can download this PPT now by clicking on the link in the description of this video. So moving on, we have already dealt with F.W. Taylor and scientific management in module 2. We have dealt with Henry Fayol and Gulick and Ervig in classical theory, and today will be our last session on classical theory, that is Mooney and Reilly, and it will also contain some practice questions based on the entire classical theory. Those will be at the end of the session. So moving ahead with Mooney and Reilly today. If you are wondering, I did not find any picture of Reilly on the internet. This is James D. Mooney. So there are two people, James D. Mooney and Alan C. Reilly, that we will be studying about. So Mooney and Reilly were the first in the USA to formulate the classical theory in 1931 when their book Onward Industry was published. Now remember, Henry Fayol was the first person that we studied in classical theory. He was a French guy. The second people we studied were Gulick and Ervig, and they published their book in 1937, if you remember. Mooney and Reilly published their book in 1931, and so they are known as first people in USA to formulate the classical theory because they published their book in 1931. Their book was Onward Industry. Later in 1939 they republished the same book under a new title, The Principles of Organization. They opined that the principle formed the basis for efficient functioning of organization. Obviously, because they were classical theorists, they said that principles were more important, structure of organization was more important, and therefore they said that principles form the basis of the efficient functioning of any organization. They popularized organization charts and manuals. These were some things that they worked on, and they gave us 4 principles. In 1931 they gave us 4 principles. Later on in 1939 Gulick and Ervig gave us more exhaustive list of principles. This was in 1931. So we'll see what 4 principles that Mooney and Reilly gave us. The first principle was coordination. Now remember, coordination was the most important principle according to Mooney and Reilly. Now if you remember, in our previous sessions we have dealt with this thing that division of work was the common thing running across the entire classical theory. Any author you pick up, they will say that division of work is important. Mooney and Reilly also said that there should be division of work, which is our third principle. We'll learn about that. But the most important according to Mooney and Reilly was coordination. If you remember, most important according to Fayol and Gulick and Ervig was division of work. Mooney and Reilly also dealt with division of work, but most important was coordination according to them. They said that coordination was the most fundamental principle. We'll see. Mooney defined coordination as the orderly arrangement of group effort to provide unity of action in pursuit of a common purpose. So there is some common goal and common purpose of an organization. To pursue that common purpose, to pursue that common goal, if you apply group effort in an orderly arrangement, that is nothing but coordination. You are coordinating with each other. That is nothing but coordination. Mooney maintained that it was coordination that is the fundamental principle of any human organization. As I said, Mooney and Reilly believed that coordination is the most fundamental principle. It is the most important principle of any human organization. He further writes, the term organization and the principles that govern it are inherent in every form of concerted effort, even when there are not more than 2 persons involved. So what he means here is that the term organization and the principles that govern it, ये जो दो शब्द हैं, organization जो होती है और जो principles जो होते हैं जो organization को govern करते हैं, ये दोनों चीज़ें हर जगह पाई जाती हैं. They are inherent in every form of concerted effort. The term organization and principles that govern that organization are inherent. They are by default imbibed in every form of concerted effort, even when there are not more than 2 persons involved. तो अगर खाली 2 ही लोग काम कर रहे हैं तो भी उसको ऑर्गेनाइजेशन बोल सकते हैं, तो भी उसमें प्रिंसिपल्स गवर्न करेंगे. इफ देयर आर ओनली 2 persons involved, if there are not more than 2 persons involved, even then the term organization applies to them. Even then the principles that govern them apply to them. He gives us one example. He takes the example of an effort of 2 men to move a stone. So if there is a big stone and if 2 people are moving it, he says here we have coordination, the first principle of organization. So coordination is the most fundamental principle. Even when there are only 2 people involved, even then coordination exists. This is what Mooney and Reilly say. He further observed coordination includes within itself all other principles which are subordinate to it and through which it operates. So coordination is the most fundamental principle and it includes within itself all the other principles. This is how important coordination is. So this is our first principle given by Mooney and Reilly, that is nothing but coordination. The second principle given by them is scalar process or hierarchy. We have learnt about scalar process and hierarchy numerous times in our previous sessions. It is nothing but the hierarchical model or the top down model or the pyramidal model that we have seen. It consists of a particular line of authority, a line chain. We have dealt with this numerous times in our previous sessions, so please visit previous sessions to learn about this in detail, especially Fayol. In Fayol, we have learnt about scalar process in detail. So Mooney and Reilly emphasized hierarchy in organizational design. Obviously, hierarchy means scalar process, so they emphasized hierarchy in organizational design, and they called this as the scalar process. To them, it constitutes the universal process of coordination through which the supreme coordinating authority operates throughout the whole coordination. As we have already seen earlier, coordination is the most fundamental principle, so scalar process also constitutes the universal process of coordination. They stated that the scalar process has its own principle, process and effect. These they refer to as leadership, delegation and functional definition. So what basically this means is, Mooney and Reilly gave us 4 principles. Second of them was scalar process, and what Mooney and Reilly say is scalar process within itself has its own principle, has its own process and effect, and its own principle, process and effect, these are nothing but leadership, delegation and functional definition. This is nothing but scalar process as given by Mooney and Reilly. So moving on, we have our third principle as functional differentiation, which was given by Mooney and Reilly. Functional differentiation is nothing but division of work. We know what functional differentiation is. We have dealt with this in Gulick and Urwick's lecture. If you remember, the second principle of Gulick was basis of departmentalization. That is nothing but theory of departmentalization. In it, Gulick gave us 4 P's. What were the 4 P's? To revise the 4 P's of Gulick, they were: first was purpose or function, second was process or skill, third was persons or clientele, and fourth was place or territory. So the first P was the purpose or function, and that is nothing but functional differentiation. Division of work based on function is nothing but functional differentiation. So as you can see, Mooney and Reilly have also dealt with division of work. Mooney and Reilly have suggested that the functional principle should be followed in organizing tasks into departments. So while you are dividing work and you are organizing departments, what principle you should follow was functional principle. Remember, this was in 1931, and what Gulick gave us, that was in 1937. So in 1931, Mooney and Reilly, they came up with only one principle, that is the functional principle of division of work, and they said that there should be functional differentiation when you divide the work and you organize your tasks into departments. They explain the difference between generals and colonels is one of the gradation in authority and is therefore scalar. The difference between an officer of infantry and an officer of artillery, however, is functional because there is distinct difference in nature of their duties. So here he gives us an example of military organization, and he says that take an example of general and colonel. If you try to differentiate between them, there is a differentiation of gradation in authority, that is a scalar chain. General is above colonel and stuff like that. So there is an authority level difference. There is a level of gradation. One person is higher than another in level and another person is lower in level than another. So there is a scalar chain difference. This is a gradation of authority. But the difference between an officer of infantry and an officer of artillery, however, is functional because they both are at the same level. Officer of infantry and officer of artillery are both at the same level, but their functions is different. This is how you divide your work into functions. To give you an example of Indian administration, there are various ministries in the government of India. Let's take an example of any one ministry. Let's say Ministry of Finance. Ministry of Finance again is divided into different departments. Let's say Department of Revenue, Department of Economic Affairs, Department of Investment and People Assets Management. So these are nothing but departments of Ministry of Finance. There are 5 departments in all in Ministry of Finance in Government of India. So these departments are nothing but division of work. You have divided the work of Ministry of Finance into 5 different departments based on the functions those each departments perform. So that is the functional differentiation in the Ministry of Finance. So coming back to our topic, Mooney and Reilly say that there should be functional differentiation whenever you divide the work. According to them, functionalism means the differentiation between kinds of duties. So what is functionalism is nothing but differentiating between kinds of duties. For example, officer of infantry will perform duties related to infantry and officer of artillery will perform duties related to artillery. So there is a differentiation based on the kinds of duties. That is nothing but functional. This is what Mooney and Reilly say. They say that all jobs involve any one of the 3 functions. If you pick up any kind of job, it will contain any one of the 3 functions. The first is nothing but determinative function, which is nothing but setting goals. You are setting goal for your tasks. The second function is application function, which is nothing but acting purposely to achieve the goals. The third principle और फंक्शन इज द इंटरप्रेटिव फंक्शन विच इज नथिंग बट डिसीजन मेकिंग. सो आप किसी भी तरह की जॉब उठा लो, हर जॉब में इन तीनों में से कोई एक फंक्शन लगना ही लगना है. देयर विल बी वन ऑफ द थ्री फंक्शंस इन्वॉल्व्ड इन ऑल द काइंड्स ऑफ वर्क. आइदर इट विल बी determinative function that is the job entails, either it will be the application function that is the job entails, or either it will be the interpretive function that is the job entails. Management must be aware of these functions to be prepared to discharge them when necessary. So if you have to effectively discharge these functions, management must be aware of these functions. This is nothing but our third principle given by Mooney and Reilly, which is nothing but functional differentiation. The fourth principle given by Mooney and Reilly is line and staff. We have learnt about principles of staff in Gulick and Erwick's lecture also. I have already dealt with the concept of what is line authority and what is staff authority. Please visit previous sessions for detailed information on this. To briefly revise this, line authority are nothing but the line of authority, the scalar chain, the hierarchical line that we see. Commander-in-chief, generals, colonels, lieutenants. So these are the line authorities. They have authorities above one another. They are one level above each other. So these are the line authorities. They come in a particular line. And what are the staff authorities? They help the line authority in executing their tasks. For example, if we take military examples, the people who are concerned with kitchen, the people who are concerned with supply and transport, or medical services or veterinary services, these are nothing but staff authorities. They are not directly involved in the war activities or the field activities. They just simply help the line authorities in executing their tasks more effectively. So this is the concept of line and staff. What Mooney and Reilly say is, they suggested that the line management should be vested with authority to get things done. Obviously, because they are line authority, they should have the authority to get things done and not the staff authority. Authority should lie with the line management. At the same time, Mooney and Reilly recognized the role of staff in providing advice and information. Now remember, in Gulick's and Erwick's lecture we have seen in 1937 they gave us differentiation in staff authorities also, general staff and special staff. Please visit Gulick and Erwick's lecture for that. What Mooney and Reilly in 1937 they gave us was just the concept of line and staff. They did not differentiate staff further like Gulick and Erwick did. They say that the authority should lie with the line management, and they recognize the role of staff in providing advice and information. According to Mooney, the staff is an expansion of the personality of the executive. We have seen this in detail in Gulick and Erwick's lecture, that how staff is the representative of the executive. It means more eyes, more ears and more hands to aid him in forming and carrying out his plans. So basically they relieve the line authorities of their burden. They help him in providing advice and adequate information. This is how they help the line authority. So this is the fourth principle of line and staff that Mooney and Reilly gave us. So to revise, Mooney and Reilly gave us four principles. The first one was coordination, which they say was the most fundamental and the most important principle of all the organizations in the world. The second principle they gave us was the scalar chain of authority or the hierarchy. The third principle they gave us was a functional differentiation, which is nothing but division of work based on functions. The fourth principle that they gave us was of line and staff. So we are done with Mooney and Reilly. So to move ahead with criticisms of classical theory as a whole. Now let's say in UPSC you are asked to criticize classical theory as a whole. What you should do is you should refer to criticisms of Fayol, Gulick and Erwick and all these criticisms and mix these according to need of question. Take two criticisms of Peter Drucker from Fayol's and take Herbert Simon's criticism of principles of organization from Gulick and Erwick's, and like this you mix and match all these criticisms to suit the need of the question, whatever the need of the question is. Because we have covered the criticisms in much detail, we have covered the criticisms of Fayol, we have covered the criticisms of Gulick and Erwick. So as a whole, classical theory has the same criticisms all over. So whatever question you get, whatever the need of the question is, you mix and match these criticisms, accordingly you frame your answer. Also, if you want extra criticisms, now we have dealt with criticisms in much detail, but if you want some extra criticisms, some more criticisms, you can refer to Lakshmikant's public administration book, not the polity book, Lakshmikant's public administration book, page number 115-116, and he has given some extra criticisms of classical theory which are given by Chris Argyris, Simon and March and V. Subramanian. V. Subramanian is an Indian author, so you can refer Lakshmikant's PubAd book for this if you want some extra criticisms. Basically you will not need that. We have dealt with all the criticisms. Basically criticisms of classical theory is the same, that they are mechanistic theory, they are dehumanizing theory, they have neglected the human side, they are static, they are just normative and whatnot. So moving on, significance and relevance of classical theory as a whole. So as a whole, what is the significance and relevance in today's times? How is classical theory relevant in today's times? We'll see in our future slide. So we'll deal with relevance in today's times. Also with respect to significance of the classical theory, we have dealt with this in our Fayol session, in our Gulick's and Erwig session, that how even after criticisms, how they are significant. We have dealt with this. Please visit previous sessions for that. Also you can read Lakshmikant Public Administration book, page 116. It is on the same page as criticisms. Criticism starts on page 115, ends on 116, and significance starts on page 116. So you can read Lakshmikant Pabad book, page 116 for this. In this slide we will deal with relevance of classical theory in today's times in Indian administration. How classical theory is relevant today. We will deal with this in this slide. In spite of the criticisms, the principle of administration continue to be found relevant even today. No textbook on administration is complete without a discussion on the principles of organization. The simple truths underlying the propositions stated as principles by the classical thinkers cannot be denied. So how much ever you criticize the principles, the classical theory, but no textbook on administration is complete without you have discussed the principles of organization. This is how important they are, and this is how relevant they are in today's times. Any book on administration you pick up, you will find the principles of organization in them. While calling them proverbs, we have seen this in Gulick's and Erwig's lecture. Herbert Simon called principles of organization as proverbs. He made fun of them like they are proverbs. So while calling them proverbs, Herbert Simon devoted considerably to these principles in his writings. Even he could not discard them. So while he criticized these principles, even then he considerably gave time to these principles. He acknowledged these principles. However, we should keep in mind that while we are praising these principles, we should keep in mind that these propositions are misleading, as they at best represent only half truths. I have marked this in red so that we do not lose the sight of our criticisms, because these criticisms are somewhat true. These principles, these propositions, they at best represent only half truths, because they do not consider the human side of the organization, right? They neglect the human side. They are mechanistic at best. The inescapable conclusion is that they do not represent all the aspects of administration. The human side has been neglected by these principles. We should keep in mind while praising these principles. Even while writing the answer in exam, if you are writing the answer for relevance, you should always mention the negative point that they have neglected the human side. They are only half truths. Moving on, we find working of these principles as division of work, coordination, delegation, etc. in the present day organizations. Organizations cannot function without adhering to these principles. As I have already given you the example of division of work in Indian administration in our previous slides of Mooney and Reiley. In functional division part, we have discussed how Ministry of Finance was divided according to functions. So as we can see, division of work is relevant even today. Coordination is relevant. We need to coordinate if you need the organization to succeed. Otherwise, the organization will be a failure if there is no coordination among employees and between employees and management. There should be coordination in every organization. Delegation and decentralization, these principles also hold true. To give you an example of Indian administration, we have delegated our power to the lowest level of the panchayats and the municipal councils. If you remember, the 73rd and the 74th Amendment Act of Indian administration gave constitutional validity to the panchayati raj system. So that is nothing but the delegation to the lowest level. We have achieved true decentralization, if not in practice then at least in theory. So delegation and decentralization, these principles also stand true in today's times. This is how classical theory is relevant even today in the present day organizations. All of these principles you can see as working. Organizations cannot function without adhering to these principles. So these principles are important. These principles continue to be taught in colleges and universities. Even we are learning as a part of its UPSC syllabus. So these principles continue to be taught in all the schools and colleges for students of public administration and management. Many people have criticized the principles, but they have not developed any alternatives to these principles. So they have just criticized, but what alternative they have given? None. They have just said that this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, but till today there is no alternative to these principles. Those principles still hold their value. With some modifications on the lines of changes taking place in the organizations, these principles can find relevance in present context also. So with changing times, as the society changes, as the culture changes, as the time changes, we can modify the given principles, and this is how some principles which are almost static, we can make them dynamic by changing them, by making some modifications according to the times. So we are done with our entire classical theory. We are done with our F.W. Taylor and scientific management, and we are done with our entire classical theory. This marks the end of our classical theory, and as always I would request you to please practice these questions. It is only the initial inhibition that you have to overcome. Once you write the questions, you will realize where you lack, your weak areas you will realize, and this is how you will improve on your writing. So these are some practice questions. I have included some UPSC questions and many non-UPSC questions. Please do write them. For example, in UPSC 2014, a question was asked, is Peter Drucker justified in saying management principles should not tell us what to do but only tell us what not to do? Comment for 10 marks. We have dealt with Peter Drucker's criticism in Henry Fayol session. If you do not remember this, please go back and visit Henry Fayol session of criticisms, and there you will find Peter Drucker's criticism. Peter Drucker has criticized Henry Fayol on many points. One of the points was that a mechanistic model was being imposed on a living business. This was the first point that Peter Drucker criticized Henry Fayol on, if you remember. The other thing that he criticized was on narrow functional base, if you remember. But the first thing that he criticized was that it was a mechanistic model. Whatever the principles that Henry Fayol gave, it was a mechanistic model that was being imposed on a living business. So what this question says is, Peter Drucker gave this statement, management principles should not tell us what to do but only tell us what not to do. Is Peter Drucker justified in saying this? This you have to put out your thoughts in 10 marks. So because this is a 10 marks question, you have to be very straightforward. You do not have to mess around with the answer. Very straightforward. You have very limited words, and there are many things that you can write in this answer. For example, all the authors like Fayol, Gulick, Ervik, they themselves have said that our principles are not rigid rules. Our principles are not exhaustive list. Our principles can change according to the changing times. So then why are you giving us these principles? Right? If it is not rigid, if it can change according to times, if the list is not exhaustive, if we can add some principles of our own, and if we can subtract some principles from the list, if the list is not exhaustive, then why are you giving us the principles? Right? This is what Peter Drucker says, that management principles should not tell us what to do but only tell us what not to do. There is no point in telling us what to do because this list is not exhaustive, this list is not universal, this list is not dynamic. So just point out the failures and the problems in every organization and give us the solutions to those problems and tell us what not to do, that you should not do this, instead of telling us what to do. This is what Peter Drucker says. You have to justify this in your own words. In 2012 there was a question for 15 marks. In what respects is Taylor's scientific management movement? We have learnt about Taylor's scientific management or classical motivational theory different from classical organizational theory expounded by Gulick Ervik. So in this question you have to compare classical organizational theory as given by Gulick and Ervik. You have to compare this with scientific management and classical motivational theory. So classical motivational theory will be in module 3, that is yet to come, so do not worry about that. But still, if you can write your answer while comparing with Taylor's scientific management and classical theory, what were the differences between Taylor's scientific management and classical theory, you would have arrived at your answer. So these are some questions. There are many non-UPSC questions also. Please do practice them. And with that, I would end this session here, and in next session we'll deal with Max Weber and his ideal type bureaucracy. So please do subscribe to the channel if you do not want to miss any upcoming videos. Also please like, comment and share this session if you like the content that I have provided. You can now download the PPT of this video by clicking on the link in the description of this video. Hope to see you soon in my next session. Peace out.